The rain came down in sheets, a cold, grey curtain that turned the world to mud and misery. For Alara, it was just another Tuesday. She huddled by the sputtering fire in her small, isolated cabin, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. The thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders did little to ward off the chill that had less to do with the weather and more to do with the gnawing emptiness in her bones. It was a permanent resident, that cold. A ghost of a life she'd barely escaped. Outside, the wind howled a mournful song through the pines that crowded the edge of her small clearing. This land, just beyond the official border of the Blackwood Pack's territory, was a no-man's land. Unclaimed. Unprotected. Just like her. It was the only place she could afford, the only place no one would look for a broken thing. A sudden snap of a twig, sharp and unnatural against the drumming rain, made her go rigid. Her head shot up, eyes wide, breath catching in her throat. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't the wind. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, a heavy, predatory stillness that prickled the hairs on her arms. Her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of bone. She crept to the single grimy window, peering through a clear patch she'd wiped in the condensation. At first, she saw nothing but the swaying trees and the deluge. Then, a flicker of movement. A shadow detaching itself from other shadows. And another. And another. Oh, gods! They materialized from the downpour, as if born from the storm itself. Wolves. Massive, sleek-furred beasts, their coats ranging from midnight black to silver grey. They didn't growl, didn't snarl. They simply watched. Their collective gaze, burning with an eerie, intelligent light, was fixed on her cabin. On her. She counted them, her trembling finger tracing their forms against the glass. 1, 2, 7, 12, 14. 14 wolves, forming a silent, inexorable ring around her home. This wasn't a random hunting party. This was a message. A verdict. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the wall to the floor, the teacup slipping from her numb fingers to shatter on the rough-hewn planks. This was it. Her past had found her. Marcus had sent them. He'd promised he would always find her, that there was no corner of the world she could hide in where his reach couldn't extend. He was a monster who wore the skin of an alpha, and these were his executioners. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for years burned hot behind her eyes. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of finding her crying. Pushing herself up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, she grabbed the iron poker from the hearth. It was a pathetic weapon against a single wolf, let alone a war party of 14, but it was something. It was a choice. She would not die cowering. The heavy oak door groaned as she forced it open, stepping out onto the rickety porch. The rain hit her instantly, plastering her thin tunic to her skin, but she barely felt the cold. Her entire being was focused on the circle of predators. At the head of the formation, directly in her path, stood the largest of them all. He was a behemoth, his fur the color of a thunderhead, his shoulders thick with muscle that rippled even in his stillness. His eyes, the color of molten gold, were locked on her. There was no malice in them, not the rabid cruelty she'd expected. There was something else, something far more terrifying, assessment. Possession. She lifted the poker, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it. What do you want? Her voice was a raw, broken thing, nearly swallowed by the storm. The giant wolf took a step forward, and the others shifted in unison, a silent, disciplined army. He was the alpha. The air crackled around him, thick with the pressure of command, a living storm of pine and ozone that demanded submission. Alara's every instinct screamed at her to bow her head, to expose her throat, to surrender. She tightened her grip on the poker instead. The ghost of old pain, of a different alpha's crushing dominance, was a shield of defiance. Never again. The great wolf tilted his head, a curiously intelligent gesture. And then, the world seemed to warp. The air shimmered around him, bones cracked and reformed with a sickening sound that was lost in a thunderclap overhead. Fur receded, limbs elongated, and where the beast had stood, a man now rose to his full, formidable height. He was naked, reins sluicing over a body carved from granite and fury. Broad shoulders, a chest covered in dark, intricate tattoos that resembled ancient runes, and a face that was all harsh angles and brutal beauty. His hair was as black as his wolf's pelt, slicked back by the rain. But it was his eyes that held her captive, the same molten gold, burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. "I am Kale," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of her feet. "Alpha of the Blackwood Pack. And you are on my land." His words were a lie, a technicality. This scrap of forgotten earth was neutral. But it was a power play, and she knew it. Still, it wasn't the lie that stunned her. It was the scent. His scent. Not just pine and ozone, but something deeper, something that called to a broken, forgotten part of her soul. It was like the smell of home after a long, bitter journey. And in the same instant, she felt it. A jolt, sharp and electric, that shot up her spine and exploded behind her eyes. A cord of energy, invisible but undeniable, snapping taut between them. Her own scent, a frightened whisper of rain-soaked wildflowers, must have hit him at the same moment. His eyes widened, the gold flaring, and a low, guttural sound escaped his throat. It wasn't a word. It was pure, possessive shock. "Mate." The word wasn't spoken. It was felt. A brand on her soul. And it was the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. This wasn't salvation. It was a different kind of cage. A bigger, stronger one, with a far more powerful warden. The poker fell from her lifeless fingers, clattering onto the wet wood of the porch with a sound that sealed her fate. Everyone was stunned, but Alara was shattered. Kale took another step, his movements deliberate, his golden eyes never leaving hers. The shock was receding from his face, replaced by a raw, primal certainty that made her blood run cold. He saw the terror in her eyes, the way she flinched back as if struck. He saw the faint, silvery tracery of old scars on her arms, barely visible in the gloom. He saw a terrified creature, a doe caught in the hunter's sights, and every protective instinct in his body roared to life. "You're coming with me," he stated, not a request, but a decree. The Alpha's command, absolute and unyielding. The other 13 wolves remained, silent sentinels, their forms tense and ready. They were his honor guard, his enforcers. The command washed over Alara, a physical force meant to compel obedience. For a moment, her body betrayed her, her knees weakening, a primal urge to obey welling up from a place she thought had been burned out of her. But then came the memory, a different Alpha, a different command, the smell of stale liquor and blood. The memory was a shard of ice in her gut, sharp and sobering. "No." The word was barely a whisper, but in the charged silence, it was as loud as a thunderclap. Kale stopped dead, his brow furrowing. Disbelief warred with irritation on his face. No one said no to him. Especially not a lone, seemingly packless female, who was trespassing on the edge of his territory. Especially not his mate. "I am not a piece of property to be claimed," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from the fire of her defiance. She hugged her arms around herself, a futile attempt to hold her splintering world together. "This is neutral land. I am not yours. And I am not going anywhere with you." A low growl rumbled in Kale's chest, an involuntary response to her rejection. The bond between them vibrated with it, a painful thrum of his displeasure. He took a breath, visibly wrestling with instincts that screamed at him to throw her over his shoulder and carry her to the safety of his den. "You are my mate," he ground out, the words tasting like metal in his mouth. "My place is your place. My protection is your right. You are not safe here." I have been safe in a packhouse before, she retorted, the words laced with a bitterness so profound it was almost a physical taste. I prefer my chances with the rain. He saw it then. Not just fear, but a deep, abiding trauma that coiled around her like a serpent. Her defiance wasn't an insult, it was a survival mechanism. This changed things. His approach had been all wrong, the blunt instrument of an alpha used to getting his way. With her, that would only break her further. From behind him, another wolf shifted. This one was leaner, his hair the color of sun-bleached sand. He pulled on a pair of jeans that had been tied around his ankle in wolf form. This was Liam, Cale's beater. His eyes, a calm, steady green, were on Alara, but his words were for his alpha. Cale, he said softly, a quiet caution. Easy. Cale shot him a warning glare, but didn't argue. He turned his attention back to Alara, forcing himself to soften his stance, to unclench the fists at his sides. I will not harm you, he said, his voice lower, rough with an emotion he couldn't name. That is a vow. But there are dangers in these woods. Rogues. Hunters. You cannot stay here alone. I have been alone for a long time, she whispered, her gaze dropping to the shattered teacup on the floor. A symbol of her small, fragile life, now in pieces at her feet. I know how to survive. Surviving is not living, he countered, a raw truth in his words that hit her harder than any command. He took another slow step, stopping at the edge of the porch, just below her. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the flecks of brown in his golden eyes. What is your name? She hesitated. A name was a piece of herself, a thing that could be owned. But looking into his eyes, she saw not just possession, but a frustrating, painful flicker of genuine concern. Alara. Alara, he repeated, the name a soft caress on his tongue. The bond between them seemed to sing with it, a low, harmonious hum. Let me help you. Let me protect you. She shook her head, a tear finally escaping to trace a cold path through the grime on her cheek. Protection feels like a cage to me, Alpha. The formal title was a wall, a way to keep him at a distance. He understood. He also understood that leaving her here, now that he knew what she was to him, was an impossibility. It would be like carving out his own heart, and leaving it to spoil in the mud. Then I will not cage you, he said, his voice a solemn oath. But I will not leave you undefended, he turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over his warriors. Liam, set a perimeter. 2-man patrols, rotating shifts. Nothing gets within a mile of this cabin without my knowing. No one speaks to her, no one approaches her unless she is in immediate danger. Is that understood? A chorus of silent nods was his answer. The wolves began to melt back into the forest, their movements fluid and silent, becoming shadows once more. Only Cale and Liam remained. This is not a cage, Alara, Cale said, his golden eyes boring into hers. It is a promise. I will keep you safe, whether you accept me or not. And I will earn your trust. No matter how long it takes. He held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent battle of wills and a torrent of unspoken emotions passing between them. Then, with a final, reluctant nod, he turned and shifted, the massive thunderhead wolf reappearing in his place. He gave her one last, lingering look before loping into the trees, disappearing into the storm that had brought him. Liam lingered for a second. He's not like the others, Alara, the beater said, his voice kind. Give him a chance. Then he too was gone, leaving her alone on the porch, drenched and shivering, surrounded by an invisible fortress of 14 wolves. She was no longer alone. And she had never felt so trapped. Days bled into a week. The rain eventually stopped, replaced by a cool, crisp autumn air that smelled of damp earth and dying leaves. But the wolves remained. Alara never saw them, not clearly, but she felt them. A flicker of movement at the edge of the trees, the faint, musky scent of wolf on the wind, the unnerving sensation of being constantly watched. It should have been terrifying, a constant state of siege. Instead, a strange, unwelcome sense of security began to creep in. For the first time in years, the snap of a twig didn't send her heart into a frantic panic. The hoot of an owl didn't make her jump. The deepest, most primal part of her brain knew that the monsters in the dark were now afraid of the bigger monsters guarding her. Cale kept his word. He didn't approach her. But his presence was a constant, heavy weight on the air. Every morning, she would find a package on her porch steps. A freshly dressed rabbit, a bundle of root vegetables, a thick, warm blanket woven from the softest wool. There was never a note. There didn't need to be. Each offering was a silent question, a patient plea. She stubbornly ignored them at first, letting the food sit until she was sure the giver was long gone. But her own supplies were dwindling, and the hunger gnawing at her belly was a more immediate threat than the alpha's patient courtship. She began to take the offerings, hating the feeling of dependence, hating the small flicker of gratitude that warmed her chest against her will. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, she was tending to the small, struggling herb garden behind her cabin when a scent reached her. Pine and storm. Her head snapped up. Cale stood at the edge of the clearing, not in his wolf form, but as a man. He wore simple leather pants and a dark tunic, his powerful frame leaning against an ancient oak. He wasn't encroaching, wasn't threatening. He was just there. Her first instinct was to run inside, to bolt the door and hide. But she was tired of hiding. Her back straightened, and she continued to pluck weeds from around her mint plants, her movements precise, her focus absolute. She would not let him see how his presence made her hands tremble. They existed in that silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustle of her work. Finally, he spoke. "The northern ridge is thick with chanterelles after the rain," he said, his voice calm, conversational. "If you like mushrooms." She didn't look at him. "I manage. My pack's healer, Anya, makes a stew with them that could make a stone weep," he continued, undeterred. "She adds wild leeks and barley." Her stomach rumbled in betrayal. She ripped a stubborn weed from the earth with more force than necessary. "I'm sure it's lovely," her tone was clipped, dismissive. He fell silent again. She risked a glance at him. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but the raw possessiveness from their first meeting was banked, replaced by a quiet intensity, a deep and unsettling patience. It was somehow more unnerving than his dominance. It felt like he could wait forever. "Why are you here, Cale?" she finally asked, her voice weary. "I gave you my word I would not leave you undefended," he answered simply. "Some things are best done by the alpha. There's nothing to defend against out here, but squirrels and boredom." The lie felt flimsy even as she said it. The reason she was here, the reason she was broken, was a far greater threat than any rogue wolf. He pushed off the tree and took a single, deliberate step into the clearing. She flinched, her hand instinctively going to the small trowel at her side. He stopped immediately, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "That's not true, is it, Elara?" he asked gently. "You're not hiding from squirrels." Her breath hitched. The phantom feeling of a cold hand on her neck, the memory of iron bars and the stench of decay flooded her senses. She squeezed her eyes shut. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you are my mate," he said, and the words were a soft, aching truth. "That makes your past my concern. Your enemies, my enemies. Your pain, my burden. Let me share it." "No," she choked out, shaking her head. "You don't want this burden. You don't want my enemies. Let me be the judge of that," he insisted, his voice dropping lower, becoming a hypnotic rumble. "Tell me his name." The name was a curse on her tongue, a poison she hadn't spoken aloud since she'd fled. Saying it would make it real again. It would summon the devil. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Suddenly, a new scent tainted the air. It was faint, carried on an errant breeze from the west, but it was utterly vile. The smell of rot. Of stagnant water and corruption. Elara froze, the trowel falling from her hand. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew that smell. It was the scent of her nightmares. The scent of him. Marcus. Cale smelled it too. His entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The patient suitor vanished, and the alpha warrior stood in his place. A low, vicious growl tore from his throat, a sound that was pure, territorial fury. His golden eyes scanned the forest line, his body coiling like a spring. Inside. Now, he snarled, the command absolute, leaving no room for argument. This time, she didn't fight him. The terror that seized her was all-consuming, a black wave that drowned out everything else. She scrambled backward, stumbling toward the cabin. Cale was a blur of motion, placing his body between her and the direction of the scent. He let out a sharp, commanding howl, not of aggression, but of alarm. A summons. Within seconds, the forest erupted. His 13 warriors materialized from the gloaming, their forms sleek and deadly. They formed a tight, bristling ring around the cabin, around Cale and Elara, their lips pulled back to reveal gleaming teeth. The air, once peaceful, was now electric with imminent violence. The foul scent grew stronger, closer. A figure emerged from the deep woods, stepping into the edge of the clearing. He was tall and wiry, with lank, greasy hair and eyes like chips of obsidian. A cruel smirk twisted his lips as he took in the scene. He was flanked by 2 other shifters, both bearing the same aura of greasy malevolence. "Well, well," Marcus drawled, his voice slick and mocking. "Look what I've found. My lost little songbird, shacked up with the famous Alpha of Blackwood. Cale, I am impressed. I didn't think you had a taste for damaged goods." Cale's growl deepened, a promise of death. "You are not welcome here, rogue. You have one chance to leave my territory, with your throat intact." Marcus chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Your territory? This little patch of nothing? I think not. And she is not yours to protect. She bears my mark. She belongs to my pack. I've come to collect my property." Elara shrank back, pressing herself against the rough wood of her cabin wall. The word property struck her like a physical blow, throwing her back into the darkness, into the cage where he had kept her. She could feel the cold iron, smell her own fear. "She belongs to no one," Cale bit out, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And she's under my protection. You will leave. Now? Or what?" Marcus taunted, taking a bold step forward. "You and your little guard dogs will start a war over this broken thing. She's not worth it, Cale. Trust me, I know." He fixed his dead eyes on Elara. "Come home, songbird. Don't make me ask again." The world began to tilt. Elara's breath came in short, ragged gasps. A panic attack was clawing its way up her throat, black spots dancing in her vision. She was trapped. The past was in front of her, a future she didn't want was behind her, and the walls were closing in. Just as her vision started to fade, Cale moved. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a force of nature. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hand shooting out to grip Marcus by the throat. The 2 thugs with Marcus shifted, snarling, but Liam and 2 other Blackwood wolves were on them in a flash, a whirlwind of fur and teeth that drove them back. "She is mine," Cale enunciated, each word a spike of ice, his golden eyes blazing with a light that was no longer human. He lifted Marcus effortlessly, the rogue's feet dangling above the ground. Marcus choked, clawing at Cale's wrist, his smirk finally gone, replaced by shock and fear. The elders won't allow this, he rasped. She's marked. Cale's gaze flickered to Elara. Is this true? Did he mark you? Elara could only nod, tears streaming down her face as she pointed a trembling finger to the back of her neck, a place hidden by her hair. A claiming mark, forced upon her, a symbol of ownership she had tried to forget. It was a brand of shame, a legal tie in their world that was almost impossible to break without a formal challenge. Seeing her nod, seeing the utter devastation on her face, something in Cale snapped. A roar of pure, unadulterated rage erupted from him, a sound so powerful it shook the very trees. He didn't kill Marcus. That would be too easy, and it would cause a political nightmare. Instead, he threw him. Marcus flew through the air like a discarded doll, crashing into a thick pine tree 20 feet away with a sickening crunch. He collapsed to the ground, groaning. Cale turned to the other two rogues, who were now being held down by his wolves. Take your filth and get out of my sight, he commanded, his voice shaking with contained violence. Tell your pack that Elara is now of Blackwood. If any of you ever set foot on my lands again, I will hang your hides from my walls. Scrambling, the two rogues helped their broken leader up and dragged him back into the forest, disappearing as quickly as they had come. The immediate danger was gone, but the clearing was thick with the aftermath. The scent of fear, bloodlust, and ozone. Cale's warriors were still bristling, their gazes darting into the woods. But Cale only had eyes for Elara. He turned to her, his chest heaving, the rage slowly receding from his eyes, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. He saw her, truly saw her, huddled against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, her face a mask of old terrors brought new. Her legs finally gave out and she slid to the ground, wrapping her arms around her knees, her body racked with silent sobs. The dam had broken. All the pain, all the fear she had kept locked away for years, came pouring out. Cale was at her side in an instant, dropping to his knees in the dirt before her. He didn't touch her. He just knelt there, his massive presence a shield against the world. Elara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Look at me. Slowly, she lifted her head. Through her tears, she saw his face. The alpha, the warrior, the beast, was gone. In his place was just a man, his golden eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. He was feeling her terror, her agony, through the bond. It was tearing him apart. He will never touch you again, Cale vowed, his voice thick. I swear on my life, on my soul. He will never hurt you again. He slowly, tentatively, reached out his hand, not to grab, but to offer. It hovered in the space between them, a bridge across a chasm of trauma. It was calloused and strong, the hand of a fighter, an alpha. But it was steady. It was a choice. And for the first time, Elara didn't flinch away. After a long, shuddering breath, she lifted her own trembling hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. It wasn't a cage. It felt like an anchor. And in the heart of the storm, she finally held on. Cale brought her to the pack house. She didn't protest this time, too emotionally and physically drained to fight. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her through the woods, his pack forming a silent, protective escort around them. The pack house wasn't a mansion, but a sprawling, sturdy lodge built of massive timbers, nestled in a valley by a rushing river. Warm light spilled from its windows, and the air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and something else, community. Family. It was so alien to her that it made her ache. He didn't take her to his own chambers, an act of surprising sensitivity. Instead, he carried her to the infirmary, a quiet wing of the building overseen by the pack healer he had mentioned. Anya was an older woman with kind, crinkling eyes and hair the color of spun silver. She took one look at Elara's pale, tear-streaked face and Cale's thunderous expression, and shooed the Alpha out with a gentle but firm hand. Go on, Alpha. You're hovering like a nervous father. Let me work. For the next few hours, Anya tended to Alara. She gave her a warm, herbal tea that soothed the frantic trembling in her limbs and wrapped her in clean, soft blankets. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. She simply created a space of quiet safety, her calm presence a balm on Alara's frayed nerves. Later, when Alara was sitting up, tucked into a comfortable bed, Anya came and sat beside her. That mark on your neck, she said softly, her voice free of judgment. It's a cruel one. Forged in dominance, not affection. It can be broken. Alara's head snapped up. How? It requires a formal challenge, upheld by the Council of Alphas. Or, Anya's eyes twinkled slightly, it can be overwritten by a true mate bond. One that is freely accepted. Freely accepted. The words hung in the air. The bond with Kale was a cataclysmic, fated thing, but she hadn't accepted it. She had fought it. She looked at the healer, her vulnerability a raw wound. He's so powerful. So certain. I'm afraid of being swallowed whole. Anya patted her hand. The Alpha you see in the throne room is not the man you will see by the hearth fire. Kale carries the weight of this whole pack on his shoulders. He is hard because he must be. But a mate is not a subject. A mate is an anchor. A partner. He is just as afraid of failing you as you are of being controlled by him. That bond runs both ways, child. His heart is in your hands now, just as yours is in his. Kale returned later, knocking softly before entering. He held a bowl of the chanterelle stew he'd described. It smelled divine. He set it on the bedside table, keeping a respectful distance. Anya said you should eat, his voice was subdued. She looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the tyrant she feared. But all she saw was a deep, weary concern in his eyes. He looked exhausted, the skin stretched taut over his cheekbones. He had felt her panic, her breakdown, as if it were his own. Thank you, she whispered, and took the bowl. She ate slowly, the warm, savory food a small comfort that worked its way through her. As she ate, she found her voice. His name is Marcus Thorne, she began, the words stiff at first. He was the son of my old Pax Alpha. When his father died, he took over. He collects things. Rare things. Powerful things, she took a shaky breath. My family line, we were once known as Stormcallers. It's a dormant gene, mostly myth now. But it woke in me. I can influence the weather. Just small things. A sudden wind, a thickening of clouds. Marcus found out. He didn't see a person. He saw a weapon. An asset. She didn't need to detail the cage, the forced marking, the brutal training sessions designed to break her will and harness her power. Kale could see it all in the haunted shadows of her eyes. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. A low growl vibrated in his chest, one of pure, murderous intent for the male who had dared to harm her. He wanted to own my power, she finished, her voice flat. I ran before he could. You are not a weapon, Kale said, his voice a raw, jagged thing. You are Alara. And your power is your own. No one will ever take it from you again. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a comforting weight. Marcus has formally accused me of theft before the Northern Council. He's demanding a trial by combat. He wants you back, and he's using our oldest laws to do it. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. You could be killed. He will not win, Kale stated, a simple, brutal fact. He cheats, she whispered, remembering. He always cheats. Then I will be ready, he finally looked at her, his golden eyes blazing with fierce conviction. But this is not my fight alone, Elara. It is yours, too. Your freedom is on the line. I will fight for you, I will die for you, but I need you to choose to fight with me. I need you to accept this bond, not as a chain, but as a shield. As a sword. Together, we are stronger than he could ever be. He was offering her a partnership. Not demanding submission. He was asking her to claim her own power, to stand beside him, not behind him. It was everything she had never known she wanted. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. A flicker of hope. A spark of rage. A desperate yearning to be free, truly and completely free, on her own terms. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She let him see the storm inside her, the one that had nothing to do with the weather. "Show me what I need to do," she said, her voice steady. "We end this. Together." A slow, fierce smile spread across Cale's face, transforming his harsh features into something breathtaking. The bond between them flared, no longer a source of tension and fear, but a surge of shared strength, a promise of the storm to come. The songbird was finally ready to sing her own war song.